She posted, "Sometimes growth means leaving people who can't match your energy sparkles." Less than a week after ending our relationship publicly through Instagram stories and cryptic captions. I never explained my side online. Months later, she deleted everything after her upgrade, got exposed for secretly living with another woman the entire relationship. Sometimes people outgrow relationships. Not everyone is meant to keep up. I stared at my phone screen in the parking lot of a grocery store, engine still running, one hand on the wheel and the other holding a bag of oranges I'd just bought for no reason in particular. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that has no business being the day your life becomes a public narrative. The post wasn't technically about me. There was no name, no photo, no direct accusation. But within 20 minutes, my phone had buzzed 14 times. Friends, mutual acquaintances, one guy I hadn't spoken to since college who apparently still followed both of us. They all had some version of the same message. "Dude, did you see what Claire posted?" I had seen it. I sat with it for a moment. The pale pink background she'd chosen for the story, the way the font was slightly tilted, as if even the text was doing a casual, unbothered lean. The little glittery star emoji at the end. That detail, for some reason, was what stayed with me longest. I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. Claire and I had been together for 2 years and 7 months. We hadn't done some explosive blowout ending. There was no screaming match, no thrown objects, no dramatic final scene. It had ended the way a lot of things end when two people stop paying attention, quietly, in increments, until one day the gap between you is wide enough to drive through. She'd ended it on a Sunday afternoon, in her apartment, in a tone of voice that sounded almost rehearsed. I'd nodded. I'd said I understood. I'd driven home and made pasta and gone to sleep. That was 8 days ago. And now, apparently, the breakup had become content. My friend Gavin called while I was still in the elevator. I let it ring. He called again before I'd even unlocked my door. I picked up. "You've seen it." Not a question. "Yeah. You good?" "I'm eating an orange," I said. He was quiet for a second. "People think it's about you." "It is about me." "You gonna say something?" I thought about it. The honest answer was no, and I couldn't entirely explain why. Not yet, not in a way that would satisfy him. So I just said, "Not tonight," and he let it go, because Gavin has always been good at knowing when to stop asking. I didn't know it then. I didn't have the full picture, the complete version, the story with all its pieces in their correct order. I was just a guy standing in his kitchen eating an orange while his ex-girlfriend's Instagram followers formed quiet opinions about his character. But that moment, that parking lot, that post, that deliberate silence I chose, changed everything. I didn't realize it then, but it did. The stories didn't stop with one. Over the next 4 days, Claire posted with a consistency that would have impressed a social media manager. Not every post was pointed. Some were just aesthetics, coffee cups and window light, and neatly folded linen. But sprinkled in between were the quotes. And the quotes had a particular direction to them, like weather vanes, all pointing the same way. Your piece will reveal who is actually disturbing it. The version of you that settles is not the version of you that survives. Not everyone deserves a seat at the table you're building. Each one landed with the cultural resonance of a motivational poster in a therapy waiting room. And each one, I understood, was a brushstroke in a portrait she was painting, of herself as a woman who had finally, bravely, freed herself from something that had been holding her back. That something, the implied shape of it, was me. My phone kept buzzing. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly had opinions. A girl named Priya, who I'd met maybe twice at Claire's birthday parties, sent me a long voice note that I played once and then deleted. The gist was that she was checking in, which was generous, but the subtext was that she wanted to understand what I'd done. Because that was the working assumption now. Claire was ascending. Therefore I had been the weight. My coworker Marcus pulled me aside on Wednesday. He meant well. He always meant well. "I saw some stuff online," he said, in the careful voice people use when they think you might cry. "It's fine," I said. "You don't want to clarify anything? Put your side out there." I looked at him. "What's my side?" He blinked. "I don't know. Whatever happened." "Nothing dramatic happened," I said. "We broke up. She's processing it publicly. That's her choice." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they think you're either very mature or in significant denial. The truth was more specific than either. I stayed quiet for a reason that had nothing to do with being the bigger person, at least not in the way people use that phrase. I stayed quiet because I'd watched Claire do this before. Not to me, to others. An old roommate she'd had a falling out with. a friend group that had fractured after some trip she'd felt excluded from. In both cases, Claire had narrated. She'd shaped the story early, and she'd shaped it loudly. And in both cases, the people on the receiving end had reacted. They'd defended themselves. They'd posted counter-narratives. They'd gotten emotional in comment sections. And it had made them look smaller every time. I wasn't going to do that. I also knew, in some quiet and not fully formed part of my thinking, that there was something off about the timing. She'd moved on very quickly. The quotes about standards and energy and peace had started before we'd even had our last real conversation, as if the narrative had been drafted in advance. I noticed it. I filed it away, and I said nothing. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. He appeared about 2.5 weeks after the breakup. Not in person, online first, the way most things happen now. His name was Hunter. I found out through Gavin, who had the particular talent of knowing things before they became common knowledge. Hunter was 31, worked in some capacity adjacent to finance or investment. His bio said building things, which meant nothing and was designed to mean nothing. He had good cheekbones and a feed full of destinations, a hotel rooftop in Lisbon, a dinner table in Milan, a beach somewhere that required either significant money or significant luck. Claire appeared in his posts almost immediately. A tagged photo from a restaurant I recognized, the kind of place with a 3-week wait list and no prices on the menu. Then a story of them at some rooftop event. Then a reel, soundtrack to something melancholic and cinematic, of them in a car at golden hour, her head tilted back, him driving with one hand. It was aspirational content. It was designed to be aspirational content. And it worked, because within a week, the reaction in the circles I'd left behind had shifted from what did he do to look what she found. Gavin texted me a screenshot of a comment on one of Claire's posts. Someone had written, "This is your era, babe. Leaving average for extraordinary." He followed it with, "You good?" I texted back, "Fine. What do you know about Hunter?" What Gavin knew wasn't much. Finance adjacent. Based in the city, but traveled frequently. Single, as far as anyone knew. Mutual connection through someone Claire had met at a work event. Why? Gavin asked. Just curious, I said. But it was more than that. I had started noticing things, the way you notice a sound in a wall, not alarming enough to call someone, but persistent enough that you can't entirely unhear it. The first thing I noticed was a location tag inconsistency. Hunter had posted a story from a hotel in Barcelona on a Thursday. The same Thursday, he'd been tagged by someone else in a photo at a bar in the city. It could have been a repost. It could have been a scheduling error. It was nothing, except it was followed by a second thing. A comment on one of his older posts, not recent, from about 6 months back, from a woman named Dara. The comment itself was ordinary, but the profile photo looked familiar in the specific way that things look familiar when you've seen them before and your brain just hasn't placed them yet. I didn't click through. Not then. I told myself I was reading into it, constructing a theory out of coincidence and wounded pride. I closed the app. What I couldn't close was the feeling that something in the architecture of Hunter's online presence was load-bearing in a way it shouldn't have been. It's a strange experience, becoming a character in someone else's story. You don't get casting approval. You don't get script notes. You just start receiving evidence of the role you've been assigned. By week 4, the mutual friends had redistributed. It wasn't announced. It happened through availability, through who responded to messages and who didn't, who showed up at the same places and who quietly stopped appearing. Gavin stayed. A couple others. But the broader social geography had shifted, and the new shape of it had Claire at the center and me at the margin. I lost people I'd actually cared about. That was the part no one tells you about the silent approach. You absorb damage you could theoretically defend against, and you just have to decide it's worth it. There was one night at a mutual friend's birthday gathering, someone named Theo, who tried to stay neutral and mostly succeeded, where I showed up and felt the specific temperature of a room that has recently been discussing you. Conversations that quieted slightly. Eyes that moved to me and then moved away too deliberately. A girl named Jasmine, who Claire had introduced me to, who smiled when she saw me in the way people smile at someone they've already decided they don't need to know anymore. I stayed 2 hours. I had a drink. I talked to Theo about his new job and meant it. I left without incident. In the car, I sat in the parking garage for a few minutes and let myself feel it. Not the anger. I didn't have much of that. More a kind of tiredness. The tiredness of being accurately perceived by no one. The posts continued. Claire had graduated from quotes to a more personal register, Journal-style captions about rediscovering herself, about what it felt like to finally be chosen, about how she learned to recognize the difference between comfort and growth. And Hunter kept posting. The trips continued. A weekend in the mountains. A dinner on what appeared to be a yacht. People commented things like "This is everything, and you deserve this," and couple goals. I noticed Dara's name again. In the comments. Quiet. Watching. I still didn't click through. But the thought was there now, persistent. Something doesn't fit. I am not the kind of person who rebuilds himself dramatically. I didn't wake up one morning with a new philosophy. I didn't get an aggressive haircut or start cold plunging or post cryptic captions about doing the work. I just started doing the work. At the office, there had been a project I'd been hesitant about, a restructuring of an internal system that would require a lot of hours and significant exposure if it failed. I'd been circling it for months, finding reasons to delay. Around week 6 post-breakup, I stopped finding reasons and started doing it instead. I worked nights. I brought in a colleague who was sharper than me in 2 specific areas and let her take the lead in those areas without ego. By the end of the quarter, the project had worked. Not perfectly, but measurably. My manager mentioned it in a review, then mentioned it again in a meeting with his manager. The word promotion was used, without commitment, but it was used. I moved apartments. Not dramatically, not to somewhere twice as nice to prove a point. Just somewhere that felt like mine in a way my old place hadn't. I got rid of furniture that I'd bought during the relationship because it had felt like a compromise at the time. I replaced it with things I'd actually chosen. The apartment was quieter. That was fine. I ran more. Not obsessively. 3, 4 times a week. Early mornings before the city had fully started. There was a park 15 minutes from my new place where the light came through the trees in a way that, on good days, made me feel like I was the only person on earth, which is sometimes exactly what you need to feel. Gavin came over for dinner one night and looked around the apartment and said, "You're doing okay." "Yeah," I said. "Not performing okay. Actually okay." "I think so." He nodded. We ate and watched something on TV and didn't talk about Claire or Hunter at all, which was its own kind of gift. Then, in the 3rd month, a message arrived that I didn't expect. It came from an account I didn't recognize, not a bot. It seemed just a private profile with very few posts and a name that meant nothing to me. The message was short. "You don't know me, but you might want to know that Hunter isn't who he's presenting himself to be. I'm not trying to start drama. I just think you should know the full picture." I stared at it, and then I archived the message and went to bed. Because I wasn't doing this. Whatever this was. I wasn't going to become the person who gets recruited into an exposure campaign by a stranger online. I wasn't going to start investigating Claire's new relationship because someone with a private profile told me I should. I had a life now. I had a project at work and a new apartment and morning runs through a park. I was not going to let any of this drag me back in. But I didn't delete the message. Something had changed in Claire's feed. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you only notice if you've been paying attention, or if you're someone who trained themselves to stop paying attention and finds that their eye still catches certain things anyway. The post slowed down. Not dramatically, but the frequency dropped. The golden hour couple content became rarer. Hunter's tags of her stopped. She started posting more solo content, the kind that looked, to anyone scrolling quickly, like confident independence, but had a texture to it. If you looked longer, that felt more like filling space. I noticed. I didn't read into it. People post less sometimes. Then Natalie messaged me. Natalie and I had been close before Claire. She was one of those friendships that exists in its own lane, independent of relationships, and had stayed largely undisturbed by the fallout. She was careful, Natalie. She didn't speculate. She didn't gossip in the way that performs concern while actually delivering entertainment. When she said something, it was because she'd thought about whether to say it. Her message was, "Can we talk this week?" We met at a coffee place near her office on a Wednesday afternoon. She was already there when I arrived, both hands around a cup, the specific posture of someone about to say something they've rehearsed. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I want you to know I'm not telling you because I want anything to happen. I'm just telling you because I'd want to know." I nodded. "Okay." Someone told me that Hunter has been in a long-term relationship. Not a past one. A current one. A woman he lives with. I sat with that. "Who told you?" "Someone who knows him." "I can't give you more than that right now. The person is nervous about it." "How sure are you?" "I'm not certain. It's one source. But the source has reason to know." I drank my coffee. Outside, someone walked past with a dog the size of a small horse. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "That's why I'm telling you." Because I don't think you need to do anything. I just thought you should have the full picture. On the train home, I thought about the message in my archive. The stranger who'd said, "You might want to know that Hunter isn't who he's presenting himself to be." I thought about the location inconsistency. The commenting woman named Dara who'd appeared twice now, quiet and watching. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was starting to have the shape of something real. I still said nothing to anyone. But I went home that night, and, for the first time since the breakup, I opened my archive. I didn't go looking for it. I want to be clear about that, because the version of events where I became obsessed and investigated and orchestrated some kind of exposure would have made me a different character in this story, a character I didn't want to be. What happened was slower and messier, and ultimately, it wasn't mine to engineer. I responded to the archived message. Briefly, I said, "I'm not interested in starting anything, but I'm listening." The person, who eventually identified herself only as a friend of Dara's, which itself told me something, replied over the course of 2 days in pieces, the way people share things when they're scared of the consequence of sharing them. Dara and Hunter had been together for almost 3 years. They weren't on again off again. They weren't separated. They lived together in an apartment Hunter owned, 20 minutes from the center of the city. Dara worked in healthcare. She was quiet on social media, which is why she'd been easy to miss. She was also, this person told me, completely unaware of Claire's existence until approximately 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, which meant, while the rooftop photos were being posted, while the couple reel was being soundtracked and shared, while comments about "this is your era, babe" were accumulating, Hunter had been going home to Dara. The evidence wasn't dramatic. It never is. It was a series of ordinary details assembled into an undeniable shape. A hotel check-in receipt that placed Hunter in the city on a night he'd claimed to Dara he was traveling. A photo Dara had posted from their apartment. A clearly recognizable lamp. A recognizable shelf that appeared in the background of one of Hunter's own posts, in a story he'd framed as his workspace. Natalie's source and my source, it turned out, were connected. Information was moving through the people who actually knew Hunter in quiet parallel lines. And then, at some point in the 5th month after my breakup with Claire, it stopped being quiet. I don't know exactly what triggered the confrontation between Dara and Hunter. I know it happened. I know it was not, by any account, an orderly conversation. I know that Dara, who had been told something that restructured every memory of the past 3 years, did not simply absorb it privately. She is not that kind of person. What she did first was go to Claire. Not aggressively. Not to create a scene. She went, from what I was told, with the same energy she probably brought to everything. Calm, clear, tired in a way that had been earned. She showed Claire things. Dates. Photographs. Messages. The lamp. The shelf. 3 years of a life Hunter had been living in full while performing a different version of himself for Claire's camera. Claire, I was told, sat very still for a long time. Then she left. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I heard this from Natalie, who heard it from the overlapping network of people who'd been quietly watching the same thing I had. By that evening, the comment sections on Claire's posts had started shifting. People who'd been following the story, and there were more of them than I'd realized, because the internet watches everything, had started connecting dots. Screenshots were being shared. Someone had put together a photo timeline that showed the lamp appearing in both Dara's apartment posts and Hunter's workspace stories. The thing that had been building privately for months was suddenly, and rapidly, public. The story online changed overnight. Within 48 hours, most of the posts were gone. Not all at once. It happened in waves, the way things do when someone is deciding, in real time, what version of events they can still control. First the couple reels. Then the tagged photos. Then the indirect quote posts, the growth captions, the energy quotes, the glittery star emoji that had started the whole thing. By Thursday morning, Claire's Instagram was nearly empty. The stories had expired or been deleted. The comments, the thousands of "this is your era, babe," and "leaving average for extraordinary remarks," had nothing left to attach to. Gavin sent me a voice note that was mostly him not knowing what to say, which I appreciated more than if he'd known. The mutual friends who had redistributed themselves in Claire's direction over the past months began, quietly, to reach back. Not all of them, but enough. The messages had a particular texture to them. Careful, slightly overwarm, calibrated to the task of reconnecting without directly acknowledging the reason for the gap. A few of them were genuine. I could tell the difference. Theo texted, "Hey, I owe you an actual conversation. When you're around." I texted back, yeah, let's do that. Jasmine, the girl from the birthday party who had smiled at me with deliberate indifference, sent a message that was mostly emojis and a hope you're doing well that I left unread. Not out of cruelty, just because some bridges, once crossed, don't need to be crossed back. I didn't celebrate. I want to be honest about that. When I'd imagined, in the early months, some version of vindication, and I had imagined it, I'm not pretending I hadn't. It had always felt satisfying in the imagination. The reality of it was quieter. There was no triumph in watching someone's public narrative dismantle. I'd known Claire. I'd spent nearly 3 years with her. Watching her get humiliated by someone she trusted wasn't a victory. It was just a sad outcome on top of a sad situation. And then she called. First, a text. Hey, can we talk? I saw it. I didn't respond. Then another. 2 days later. I know I have no right to ask anything, but I need to talk to someone who knew us. Just once. Please. Then a call, which I let ring through to voicemail. She didn't leave one. Then another call, the next morning, which I also didn't answer. I put the phone down and made coffee and stood at the window of my apartment looking at the street below, where the morning was doing what mornings do, carrying people forward in every direction with no particular awareness of any of it. I sat with the question of whether to answer. I called her back on a Sunday. I don't know entirely why Sunday specifically. Maybe because it felt like a day for finishing things. Maybe because I'd run that morning and come home and found myself unusually calm, and it seemed like the right state to be in for a conversation that required it. She answered on the second ring. Thank you, she said immediately. Don't thank me yet, I said. I'm not sure what this is. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I just wanted to talk to someone who wasn't involved in all of it. I'm the most involved person you know, I said. You made me a chapter in the story. Another silence. I know I did. That's something I wanted to say. I'm sorry for that. I sat down. I hadn't planned to say much. But here's the thing about finally having the full picture. Sometimes you want to understand how it fits together, not for revenge, not for validation. Just because you've been living with an incomplete version for a long time. Why did you do it that way? I asked. The posts. The quotes. Why make it public? She took a moment. Because he told me to. I hadn't expected that. Not directly, she continued. Not like an instruction. But he'd say things like, you should tell your story, and you deserve to be seen choosing yourself. It felt like support at the time. I didn't realize he was managing something. He wanted you burned behind you, I said. He wanted your history cleared. She didn't say anything, which was its own answer. I thought about the timeline then. The way the quotes had started before the breakup was even fully finished. The way the narrative had been preloaded, ready to deploy. And I thought about how I'd felt in those first days, confused by the speed of it, almost more than the content. Was there anything real? I asked. Not vindicatively. I genuinely wanted to know. Between us. Toward the end. Was it already gone before it ended? It was complicated, she said. It always is, I said. There were things I was unhappy about. Real things. Some of them were about us. Some of them were about me. And then Hunter came into the picture, and he reflected everything back at me in a way that felt like being understood. But I think he was performing understanding. He was good at reading people. Good at giving them the version of validation they were looking for. And the posts were part of that. I think so. Yes. I looked at the wall across from me. A print I'd bought a few months back. Something abstract that I'd chosen because it looked like early morning light, which sounds pretentious but was honest. I should tell you something, I said. And I'm not telling you this to make you feel worse. I'm telling you because it's the only thing I held back. She waited. There were things I noticed early. Not proof of anything, just patterns. Inconsistencies. I had someone reach out to me with information before any of this went public. I had a conversation with Natalie. I had months of knowing that something wasn't right. Why didn't you? Because it wasn't mine to expose, I said. And because I was watching you post things about how I wasn't enough, and some part of me thought, if I do anything now, it looks like jealousy. It looks like I couldn't handle it. And it also wasn't my information. It belonged to Dara. She was quiet for a long time. I made you the villain, she said. You told a story where I was the limiting factor, I said, which was more useful to you at the time than it was accurate. I'm sorry. I know, I said. Are you okay? I thought about my apartment and the morning run and the project that had worked and the print on the wall that looked like early light. I thought about Gavin bringing wine and the Sunday silence of a life that had been built quietly without anyone watching. Yeah, I said. I'm actually okay. That's good, she said. And she meant it. I could hear that she meant it. I need to go, I said. Okay. Take care of yourself, Claire. And I hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a few minutes. And I noticed, carefully, honestly noticed, that what I felt was not satisfaction, not triumph, not even relief. It was more like the feeling you get when you finally put down something heavy. You don't feel powerful. You just feel like your hands again. Several months later, someone at work mentioned social media in passing, some joke about couple posts and curated lives, and I realized I'd gone 4 weeks without opening Instagram at all. Not as a gesture, just because I'd stopped needing to. My promotion came through. The project I'd spent months on had compounded into something larger, and my manager had gone to bat for me in a way I hadn't expected him to. I moved into a slightly better role. The work was harder and more interesting, which is the best version of hard. I ran a half marathon in the spring, not to prove anything, just because I'd been running anyway, and someone I'd met at the park had suggested signing up. We finished around the same time. We went for breakfast after. It was a good morning. Gavin and I got into a habit of cooking dinner together on the last Sunday of every month. It started because he'd said once that he wanted to learn to cook properly, and I'd said I'd help. And then it just continued because it was the kind of thing that didn't need a reason to continue. I heard things about Claire secondhand. Not through her, not from any shared social infrastructure, but from the overlapping world of people who sometimes carry news without meaning to. She had, from what I understood, stepped back from social media significantly. Was quieter. Was doing, by most accounts, fine. I hope that was true. I meant that. I didn't post anything. Not about the breakup, not about what had happened, not about the restoration of my reputation among people who'd briefly decided I was the villain. Nothing. The temptation, if I'm honest, had been real during the worst months. There had been moments when the silence felt less like dignity and more like deprivation. When I wanted to say, here is what I knew, here is what I chose not to do with it, here is who I was the entire time. I didn't. Because the point was never to win the internet's version of events. The point was to live through it honestly and come out with something intact. There is a version of this story where I engineered a comeback, where I orchestrated a counter-narrative, dropped information at the right moment, timed a post for maximum vindication. That version has a cleaner shape. It's more satisfying in the structure of it. But that version isn't true. What's true is simpler and stranger and ultimately more mine. I didn't know everything. I suspected things. I held information loosely and let other people do what they needed to do with it. And in the meantime, I built a life that existed entirely independent of what anyone was saying about me online. That's the whole story. There's no lesson at the end that I earned through suffering. No wisdom I could have arrived at more efficiently. Just time and work and the slow accumulation of a self that didn't need an audience. She spent months trying to rewrite the story online. The truth only needed one day.